Welcome back to another episode of the Precision Health Podcast with Mirthe. Now, in this podcast, I am giving you empowering tools and knowledge so you can become the best version of yourself, live longer, healthier, happier. In today's podcast, I want to talk about something that people often overlook when they're thinking about health optimization and longevity, and that is stress. Now, you might be taking all your supplements and eating right and exercising and all of those types of things, but what people often overlook and what is undermining a lot of their health efforts is stress. Now, stress comes in lots of different shapes and forms. The one that we will talk about the most today is psychological stress, but there are also physical stressors that can contribute to stress burden on the body. Now, why does stress matter so much? A lot of you have heard about fight or flight mode and maybe even about the vagus nerve. It's having a moment at the moment. And we have two types of nervous system in the body. We're either in fight or flight mode, it's also called the sympathetic nervous system, or in the parasympathetic nervous system called the rest, digest, and heal mode as well. Now, the vagus nerve, which a lot of people have heard of, is actually our main nerve that is stimulated when we are in that parasympathetic, in that rest, digest, and heal mode. And when we're either in one or the other, usually either fight or flight or in rest, digest, and heal. And fight or flight is triggered traditionally when there's something that is a threat to our life, such as a tiger chasing us. The body then sends all the nutrients, all the blood flow to our muscles so that we can run away from that perceived threat, that tiger. It also makes our blood pressure go up because it makes the heart pump faster, and it basically just redirects all the resources so we can get away from that threat and survive. Now, when we're in rest, digest, and heal mode, the body sends blood flow to the rest of the body, including our digestive organs, our reproductive organs, all these things that it doesn't think is necessary for survival in the moment when there is a tiger chasing us. But that is very important for us to live a long, happy, healthy life. Now, what often happens is that acute stress, if there's a tiger chasing us, not a big problem. But we do then need to go back into that parasympathetic rest, digest, and heal mode. And the body is designed, or was designed originally, to be mostly in that parasympathetic rest, digest, and heal mode, and then just short term in the fight or flight mode. And if we are constantly in fight or flight mode, which happens nowadays, then issues happen. Because the body can't quite distinguish between, is there a tiger chasing us, or is there a stressful work situation, a deadline? Is there a difficult situation with a spouse or a friend or someone else in the environment? Or is it something that we're ruminating over, we're constantly thinking negative thoughts of? All of that actually triggers a similar stress biochemistry in the body as if there was a tiger chasing us. And if that happens long term, that's when problems arise. And what this chronic stress does to the body, it actually basically fries us from the inside. It creates this kind of rust in the whole inside of our body. It degrades our cells, causes stress to them, damage to them, and it has been linked to all sorts of bad health effects. You've probably heard about it, how stress or stressful life events can sometimes trigger other chronic illnesses, such as a cancer or a heart disease or an autoimmune disease. And that is because when we are in chronic stress, in chronic fight or flight, the body cannot be in the restorative healing mode. But what that also does, it messes with our immune system. Now, our immune system is necessary to get rid of infections, invaders, but also get rid of mutated cells. If they accumulate, then the body is more prone to cancers, for example. Or if the immune system is skewed and it doesn't do its job properly, we're more prone to autoimmune conditions such as Hashimoto's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, all these types of autoimmune conditions that are actually quite prevalent these days. When we're in a short-term acute stress, it can be a good thing. We're running away from a tiger, we're getting shit done, because the body pumps out all this biochemistry, cortisol, adrenaline, so we can focus and run. However, like I said before, we actually then divert all the nutrients away from all of our restorative, regenerative, healing organs, including reproductive organs and digestive organs. So oftentimes that can be one of the missing links to your health puzzle. You might be having digestive issues, you're trying all the right things, eating the right foods, taking supplements, probiotics, all those types of things. But if you're constantly in fight or flight, the body can't send the signals to the digestive tract to digest, to heal, to get rid of infections, to send the right digestive juices in there. And then that can be the missing link. It can be sometimes as simple as that. What also happens if you're constantly in fight or flight is that the gut immune system doesn't get the nourishment from the body it needs. So it becomes weaker. People also call it leaky gut, when the gut lining becomes more permeable, and all of a sudden factors from the gut that should stay in there go into the bloodstream and inflame the body, contributing to chronic inflammation in the whole system. Often that can also contribute to food intolerances, hidden food intolerances to healthy foods, because they manage to get into the bloodstream at a different shape to what the body and the immune system is used to, and then the body thinks there's something attacking it, and it creates an immune response and inflammation. Now, another thing that happens when we're constantly in chronic fight or flight mode is that body also redirects the resources away from the reproductive organs. And the reproductive organs are obviously important for reproduction, fertility, but also our sex hormones. They produce a large part of our hormones such as estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Now, if the body's in fight or flight, that gets messed up. The body thinks it's not safe to make a baby, for females, for example. And even if that's not something that you're currently wanting to do, but if you're still in your reproductive years, our whole biology and our monthly cycle is tuned towards that. And if the body thinks it's stressed and it's not safe to make a baby because there's a tiger that isn't just chasing us for a few minutes, but for days and weeks and months on end, then it messes with our ovulation in the middle of the cycle. And that then skews with our hormones in the second half of the cycle. If we don't ovulate properly, the body doesn't produce the right hormones in the second part of the cycle. And then we run into all these issues that a lot of women have, like PMS before the period, or endometriosis, PCOS, problems with their period, painful, clotty, heavy, shortened cycles, or all these estrogen dominant symptoms that you probably have heard of if you are a female. Now, if you're constantly stressed, that it can also mess with our post-menopausal issues. And now the reason being is that in our reproductive years, our ovaries produce the majority of our estrogen, and our adrenal glands produce a little bit. Now, the adrenal glands are also there for our stress biochemistry, so they produce cortisol, adrenaline, and things like that. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that if once you hit menopause, your ovaries obviously stop working and stop producing estrogen. But if you didn't have a very stressful life in decades, the adrenal glands can take over and produce at least a little bit of estrogen, nowhere near the amounts that you have during the reproductive years, but at least a little bit. And if that doesn't happen because adrenal glands have been burned out and they're tired from all these years of chronic stress, they can't take up the slack and they produce very little estrogen or none when you hit menopause, and that's when we hit a lot of the problems as well. So as you can see, hormones in the reproductive years, post-menopause, they do have the stress has a big impact on that as well. Also in the perimenopausal years, when you have issues such as hot flashes, actually stress is a big part of those symptoms. For example, if you are, when the hormones become a little more kind of out of whack and uncontrolled, then usually estrogen keeps our temperature gauge quite nice and level. But if that is starting to go out of whack because of perimenopause, then all of a sudden any kind of stress and adrenaline that hits those temperature gauges in the body can mess with them a lot more, because estrogen isn't keeping it as steady anymore. And that gives us hot flashes. Oftentimes hot flashes actually correlate with stressful moments, adrenaline being pumped out, and also blood sugar spikes and dips, but we'll talk about that in a different podcast, not today. What a lot of people aren't aware of, though, is that cortisol and that main stress hormone isn't actually a bad thing. So oftentimes I get people coming to me in my clinic and they say, oh, I think I'm super stressed and my cortisol must be through the roof. Can we do strategies to lower it. Now, it's a lot more nuanced than that. We actually want cortisol. We just don't want it at the wrong time of the day and not for too long. Now, research shows that if we have cortisol in a pulsed manner, it doesn't cause issues. If it happens non-stop, it causes issues. And that pulsation actually needs to happen at a certain time of the day. Now, you might have heard of circadian rhythm. It's having a moment as well. Very important. So we actually have clocks inside the body, biological clocks, that tell the body when to do what. And it's very much tied to light coming into the system through the eyes in particular, and it sets the whole body up for different hormone productions and chemical productions throughout the day. Now, if that is out of whack, then we run into issues. And cortisol in particular has a very strong circadian rhythm. So what we want actually is we want cortisol to spike in the morning, and then we need it to taper off in the afternoon and then be low at night so that we can produce melatonin, our sleep hormone, so that we can have a nice restful sleep. Now, so this is very important. And when people are stressed, they're usually at different stages. If they're initially stressed, there's a deadline, they might be wired in the afternoon. That's when cortisol is usually too high overall. So cortisol spikes in the morning, you get a burst of energy, and then it just doesn't come down because you're constantly on the go, 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 go. I see this all the time when I measure my clients for cortisol. Really important cortisol measurement. Quick note here, you don't just want to measure it once a day in a blood test. It's very unreliable because just the blood draw in itself stresses the body out, and like I just said, we have this rhythm throughout the day, so it very much depends on when in your day you are, what your cortisol levels are doing. So what you need to do if you're interested in measuring your cortisol is actually do at least 4 times throughout the day, ideally in saliva or urine, so you're at the safety of your own home, you're not stressed by doing the test, and you measure your morning cortisol and your mid-morning cortisol, your afternoon and evening. Now, the reason this is so important is that oftentimes when people are acutely stressed and they're starting to be chronically stressed, but it's a newer onset, it's maybe for a few years, then cortisol is often high in the afternoon when it should be low, and that can basically fry our whole system because we're constantly in fight or flight mode. The body can't do its job, like we said before. It degrades our system, our cardiovascular cells, our endothelial lining in the blood vessels and the brain, contributing to all these ill health effects. Oftentimes people then have a problem with slowing down at night. They're feeling wired but tired because cortisol stays too high in the later phases of the day, so then melatonin can't come up and they can't get a restful sleep. They're staying wired. Now, what happens though, if that happens for a long time, if that persists in the system, oftentimes people then have a drop of their morning cortisol where we should have a spike, and that actually is equally as bad. Research shows that morning cortisol spike is very important to give us energy, get going for the day, motivated, but it also is important for our immune system to get rid of mutated cells, cancer cells, to keep our immune system nice and calm and not overreact, for example, autoimmunity. So if we don't have that spike in the morning, we're much more prone to cancers and autoimmunity. And also we're more prone to obesity. Now, they found that overeating can often be linked to a low cortisol in the morning or high cortisol at night. I'll do a different episode on stress and eating in particular because it's got such a big implication. People that are chronically stressed often tend to overeat, and it's just really difficult for them to get out of that because their body's in fight or flight. So basically the resources or the part of the brain that's being utilized and switched on goes from the prefrontal cortex, which is our rational decision-making part of the brain that tells us, no, you should not be eating right now, or you should be having some prawns and salad. It goes to the survival part of the brain, thinking there's a tiger, so let me just eat whatever I can, as fatty, as sugary as possible, so I can store fat for survival. So it becomes very difficult to get into that. But from a health optimization, longevity perspective, that cortisol curve is very important. And I actually see this fairly commonly when I test my clients. A lot of them have been in a stressful state for a very long time, and their cortisol curve is completely pooped. They don't have a spike in the morning. They might then ramp up throughout the day. They take coffee, they or just from being a high performing person. Oftentimes they're pumping out a lot of stress to just get it going later in the day, and then they're having issues at night, and then they're in that vicious cycle: morning too low cortisol, afternoon too high, or just completely flatlined, which is when they're very close to burnout, and that's a really dangerous part to be. Now, a really simple tool you can have to check whether your body is stressed and mostly in fight or flight, or spending enough time in the restorative rest, digest, and heal mode, is the HRV, heart rate variability. And a lot of people nowadays have health tools and tracking devices, which is wonderful because it really empowers you to become the CEO of your own health journey. I personally like the Oura Ring because it's small, but other people have different watches. And what you want is you want to have a good and high HRV, because it shows you whether the body is mostly in that parasympathetic healing mode. Research shows that HRV is correlated to your parasympathetic state and your vagus nerve mode. Now, talked about the vagus nerve, we'll do a different video in a lot more depth about that, but you want that vagus nerve to be activated and strong. It improves your HRV, which improves your heart health, your blood pressure, your cardiovascular health, but it also helps to send signals to your reproductive organs, to your digestive organs, to all of that healing restorative state. It's a very good correlation between HRV and how stressed the body is. And now oftentimes people don't think they're stressed, but they actually are, and that HRV is can really show us whether we're burning the candle on both ends and we're just pushing through by pure mental force. I see this all the time in my CEO clients, high performing clients. They don't feel the stress. They think they're fine, but the HRV tells a different story. They're constantly on go, go, go. And then there are other stressors that can also put the body into a stress biochemistry that are not just mental. And those are physical stressors such as chronic infections, inflammation, mold, environmental pollutants, heavy metals. They can trigger a stress response, and they can often also contribute to all of the bad health effects of stress, like I said before. And that's where functional medicine comes in as well. We'll test for all these things so that the body can then at least, basically it's often easier to deal with those stressors such as chronic infections and mold and environmental toxins than it is to deal with our emotional stressors. In particular, people that have they call them adverse childhood events, where they had traumatic events, whether that's big T trauma or little t traumas in their childhood. It shows that they are wired to be more prone to responding with a more enhanced stress response to stressors as they are getting older. So they might produce a lot more cortisol and adrenaline in response to a stressor compared to someone that had a very calming and soothing childhood. Now, for today, that's it. I hope you found this to be helpful, and I will do more podcasts. Message below. Tell me what you enjoyed, what you want to hear more about, so I can help you empower you to become the CEO of your own health journey.